Okay, welcome to the Isolated Literary Society presents Daily Austen with Sarah Shay. That's me. I started this as just an informal thing I was doing over on Instagram. Hi, Instagram. During quarantine, reading Pride and Prejudice, a couple of chapters a day, and I had such a good time doing it, I decided to continue on reading Emma. And I added the YouTube streams because people were wishing that they would be able to watch it later if they missed the live stream. Hello, person who is watching. All right. Also, hello, Erin, on Instagram. Sorry, I'm starting a little bit late today, on the off chance that anybody actually is paying attention to this and watching it, waiting for it at 6 every day when it's supposed to start. I made a shepherd's pie today, kind of. And it took longer than I expected. And it is, in fact, sitting cooling on the oven, on the stove right now. And it is killing me to not be eating it right now. So I hope you appreciate my sacrifice. Let us begin with today's reading. Oh, I almost forgot to start recording on GarageBand. I'm recording the audio because why not? All right. Let us begin with today's reading, Chapter 4. Harriet Smith's intimacy at Hartfield was soon a settled thing. Quick and decided in her ways, Emma lost no time in inviting, encouraging, and telling her to come very often. And as their acquaintance increased, so did their satisfaction in each other. As a walking companion, Emma had very early foreseen how useful she might find her. In that respect, Mrs. Weston's loss had been important. Her father never went beyond the shrubbery, where 2 divisions of the ground sufficed him for his long walk, or his short, as the year varied. And since Mrs. Weston's marriage, her exercise had been too much confined. She had ventured once alone to Randalls, but it was not pleasant, and a Harriet Smith, therefore, one whom she could summon at any time to a walk, would be a valuable addition to her privileges. But in every respect, as she saw more of her, she approved her, and was confirmed in all her kind designs. Harriet certainly was not clever, but she had a sweet, docile, grateful disposition, was totally free from conceit, and only desiring to be guided by anyone she looked up to. Her early attachment to herself was very amiable, and her inclination for good company and power of, her early attachment to herself, I assume she means, that means, her means Emma and, or Harriet means Emma, and her means... Oops, hold on. We're having a GarageBand issue. It stopped recording for some reason. Oh, there we go. Turn it back on again. I don't know when it stopped, so I'm going to go back a little bit. Harriet certainly was not clever, but she had a sweet, docile, grateful disposition, was totally free from conceit, and only desiring to be guided by anyone she looked up to. Her early attachment to herself was very amiable, and her inclination for good company and power of appreciating what was elegant and clever showed that there was no want of taste. The strength of understanding must be expected. Oh, shoot. Y'all, I'm really sorry. First of all, I'm sorry for saying y'all. I'm not Southern. Second of all, I want to apologize for forgetting to set up my microphone. Hold your horses but a moment, my friends. This is very embarrassing. I'm trying to record the audio for this so that I can, I don't know, maybe throw it up on Patreon or something at some point. Just seems like if I'm going to do the thing, I might as well record it. Better audio than just, just the live video feed. Because I was because I was making my shepherd's pie earlier, to set up the stuff. Okay. All right, we got Mike set up. Okay, apologies for the delay, everybody. I'm figuring this out as I go along. I'm honestly amazed that the first day went so smoothly, but I was preparing for it like the hour beforehand, pretty much the whole day beforehand. Today I made a shepherd's pie, so there we go. Okay. Now we are actually recording the audio, and we may... I'm sorry, I'm going to start over at the beginning of the chapter. At least I didn't get very far in before I realized we were having an issue. Right. Beginning. Okay. Now we're at the beginning of chapter 4. Chapter 4. Harriet Smith's intimacy at Hartfield was soon a settled thing. Quick and decided in her ways, Emma lost no time in inviting, encouraging, and telling her to come very often, and as their acquaintance increased, so did their satisfaction in each other. As a walking companion, Emma had very early foreseen how useful she might find her. In that respect, Mrs. Weston's loss had been important. Her father never went beyond the shrubbery, where 2 divisions of the ground sufficed him for his long walk or his short, as the year varied. And since Mrs. Weston's marriage, her exercise had been too much confined. She had ventured once alone to Randall's, but it was not pleasant, and a Harriet Smith, therefore, one whom she could summon at any time to a walk, would be a valuable addition to her privileges. But in every respect, as she saw more of her, she approved her, and was confirmed in all her kind designs. Harriet certainly was not clever, but she had a sweet, docile, grateful disposition, and was totally free from conceit, and only desiring to be guided by anyone she looked up to. Her early attachment to herself was very amiable, and her inclination for good company, and power of appreciating what was elegant and clever, showed that there was no want of taste, though strength of understanding must not be expected. Altogether, she was quite convinced of Harriet Smith's being exactly the young friend she wanted, exactly the something which her home required. Such a friend as Mrs. Weston was out of the question. 2 such could never be granted. 2 such she did not want. It was quite a different sort of thing, a sentiment distinct and independent. Mrs. Weston was the object of a regard which had its basis in gratitude and esteem. Harriet would be loved as one to whom she could be useful. For Mrs. Weston there was nothing to be done. For Harriet, everything. Her first attempts at usefulness were in an endeavor to find out who were the parents, but Harriet could not tell. She was ready to tell everything in her power, but on this subject questions were vain. Emma was obliged to fancy what she liked, but she could never believe that in the same situation she should not have discovered the truth. You would think that, Emma. Harriet had no penetration. She had been satisfied to hear and believe just what Mrs. Goddard chose to tell her, and looked no further. Mrs. Goddard and the teachers and the girls, and the affairs of the school in general, formed naturally a great part of her conversation. And but for her acquaintance with the Martins of Abbey Mill Farm, it must have been the whole. But the Martins occupied her thoughts a good deal. She had spent 2 very happy months with them, and now loved to talk of the pleasures of her visit, and describe the many comforts and wonders of the place. Emma encouraged her talkativeness, amused by such a picture of another set of beings, and enjoying the youthful simplicity which could speak with so much exultations of Mrs. Martin's having 2 parlors, 2 very good parlors indeed, one of them quite as large as Mrs. Goddard's drawing room, and of her having an upper maid who had lived 25 years with her, and of their having 8 cows, 2 of them Alderneys, and one a little Welsh cow, a very pretty little Welsh cow indeed, and of Mrs. Martin saying, as she was so fond of it, it should be called her cow, and of their having a very handsome summer house in their garden, where some day next year they were all to drink tea, a very handsome summer house, large enough to hold a dozen people. I feel like the circumstances of the Martins, sorry, someone just texted me, apologies that they missed the stream, and I'm letting them know it's still happening. I feel like in the film, the recent Autumn de Wilde film, which is the only adaptation I've seen recently and remember clearly, they really underestimate the circumstance of the Martins. They make them seem a lot less well off. They have a summer house. That's not nothing. I don't have a summer house. Do you? I don't even have a garden to put a summer house in. For some time she was amused, without thinking beyond the immediate cause. But as she came to understand the family better, other feelings arose. She had taken up a wrong idea, fancying it was a mother and daughter, a son and son's wife who all lived together. But when it appeared that the Mr. Martin, who bore a part in the narrative, and was always mentioned with approbation for his great good nature in doing something or other, was a single man, that there was no young Mrs. Martin, no wife in the case, she did suspect danger to her poor little friend from all this hospitality and kindness, and that if she were not taken care of, she might be required to sink herself forever. Yes, in grave danger of being treated with hospitality and kindness. How dreadful. With this inspiring notion, her questions increased in number and meaning. She particularly led Harriet to talk more of Mr. Martin, and there was evidently no dislike to it. Harriet was very ready to speak of the share he had had in their moonlight walks and merry evening games, and dwelt a good deal upon his being so very good-humored and obliging. He had gone 3 miles round one day in order to bring her some walnuts, because she said how fond she was of them, and in everything else he was so very obliging. He had his shepherd's son into the parlor one evening on purpose to sing to her. She was very fond of singing. He could sing a little himself. She believed he was very clever and understood everything. He had a very fine flock, and while she was with them, he had been bid more for his wool than anybody in the country. She believed everybody spoke well of him. His mother and sisters were very fond of him. Mrs. Martin had told her one day, and there was a blush as she said it, that it was impossible for anybody to be a better son, and therefore she was sure whenever he married, he would make a good husband. Not that she wanted him to marry. She was in no hurry at all. I read that in Harriet's voice because it had quotes around it, but then it appeared to not be in Harriet's voice. I don't know what that was all about. What's up, Jane? Well done, Mrs. Martin, thought Emma. You know what you are about. And when she had come away, Mrs. Martin was so very kind as to send Mrs. Goddard a beautiful goose, the finest goose Mrs. Goddard had ever seen. Mrs. Goddard had dressed it on a Sunday, and asked all the 3 teachers, Miss Nash and Miss Prince and Miss Richardson, to sup with her. Mr. Martin, I suppose, is not a man of information beyond the line of his own business? He does not read? Oh, yes. That is, no. I do not know, but I believe he has read a good deal. But not what you would think anything of. He reads the agricultural reports and some other books that lie on one of the window seats, but he reads all them to himself. But sometimes of an evening, before we went to cards, he would read something aloud out of the elegant extracts, very entertaining. And I know he has read the Vicar of Wakefield. He never read the Romance of the Forest, nor the Children of the Abbey. He had never heard of such books before I mentioned them, but he is determined to get them now as soon as ever he can. The next question was, what sort of looking man is Mr. Martin? Oh, not handsome, not at all handsome. I thought him very plain at first, but I do not think him so plain now. One does not, you know, after a time. But did you never see him? He is in Highbury every now and then, and he is sure to ride through every week on his way to Kingston. He has passed you very often. That may be, and I may have seen him 50 times, but without having any idea of his name. A young farmer, whether on horseback or on foot, is the very last sort of person to raise my curiosity. The yeomanry are precisely the order of people with whom I feel I can have nothing to do. A degree or 2 lower, and a creditable appearance might interest me. I might hope to be useful to their families in some way or other. But a farmer can need none of my help, and is therefore, in one sense, as much above my notice as in every other he is below it. Yes, you tell yourself that, Emma. To be sure. Oh, yes, it is not likely you should ever have observed him, but he knows you very well indeed. I mean by sight. I have no doubt of his being a very respectable young man. I know indeed that he is so, and as such wish him well. What do you imagine his age to be? He was 24 the 8th of last June, and my birthday is the 23rd, just a fortnight and a day's difference, which is very odd. Only 24. That is too young to settle. His mother is perfectly right not to be in a hurry. They seem very comfortable as they are, and if she were to take any pains to marry him, she would probably repent it. 6 years hence, if he could meet with a good sort of young woman in the same rank as his own with a little money, it might be very desirable. 6 years hence? Dear Miss Woodhouse, he would be 30 years old. Practically dead. Well, and that is as early as most men can afford to marry who are not born to an independence. Mr. Martin, I imagine, had his fortune entirely to make, cannot be at all beforehand with the world. Whatever money he might come into when his father died, whatever his share in the family property, it is, I dare say, all afloat, all employed in his stock and so forth. And though, with diligence and good luck, he may be rich in time, it is next to impossible that he should have realized anything yet. To be sure, so it is, but they live very comfortably. They have no indoors man, else they do not want for anything, and Mrs. Martin talks of taking a boy another year. I'm going to wait just a moment, because Carolyn's about to come in. Come on in, Carolyn!
Hello.
Hello. Carolyn, my roommate, was on a bit of an outing, an excursion out into the world.
Turned into more of an excursion than intended.
Well, I'm sure I shall hear the entire adventure very shortly.
The carriage was overturned.
Were you attacked by robbers?
Yes.
Dreadful
Or
business.
worse.
You little adventuress.
Worse than robbers. I was attacked by drafts.
Oh no.
Drafty breezes.
No, anything but drafts. Okay. Well,
Anyway,
we are just getting to know Miss Harriet Smith, and Emma is sussing out her feelings towards Mr. Martin.
oh.
And also, I have to note, Mr. Martin's family seems much better off than they depicted them in at least the recent film. I don't remember what it was like in the 90s film. But I was like,
Aren't they like they're like
they're farmers, and they're tenants of Mr. Knightley. But like the way Harriet describes their house, it's like, doesn't sound like they're
not poor farmers.
they're not poor. Yeah.
Yeah. They're farmers.
They have 2 parlors, Miss Harriet Smith points out. Very good-sized parlors. One of them is just as big as Mrs. Goddard's drawing room.
Ooh, my.
And they have a maid. And a summer house that could fit a dozen people.
Is it as big and grand as a small summer breakfast room at Rosings Park?
Oh, nothing can hope to be so grand as a small summer breakfast room as Rosings Park. We should all be so lucky. Yeah. All right. Back to the book. Oh, to be sure, so it is. But they live very comfortably. They have no indoors man, else they do not want for anything. And Mrs. Martin talks of taking a boy another year. I wish you may not get into a scrape, Harriet. I wish you may not get into a scrape, Harriet, whenever he does marry. I mean, as to being acquainted with his wife, for though his sisters, from a superior education, are not to be altogether objected to, it does not follow that he might marry anyone at all fit for you to notice. The misfortune of your birth ought to make you particularly careful as to your associates. There can be no doubt of your being a gentleman's daughter, and you must support your claim to that station by everything within your power. Or there will be plenty of people who would take pleasure in degrading you. Yes, to be sure, I suppose there are, but while I visit at Hartfield, and you are so kind to me, Miss Woodhouse, I am not afraid of what anybody can do. You understand the force of influence pretty well, Harriet, and I would have you so firmly established in good society as to be independent even of Hartfield and Miss Woodhouse. I want to see you permanently well connected, and to that end it would be advisable to have as few odd acquaintance as may be, and therefore I say that if you should still be in the country when Mr. Martin marries, I wish you may not be drawn in by your intimacy with the sisters to be acquainted with the wife, who will probably be some mere farmer's daughter without education. Jesus, Emma. Ooh, she's even worse in the book. To be sure, yes. Not that I think Mr. Martin would ever marry anybody but what had some education and had been very well brought up. However, I do not mean to set up my opinion against yours, and I'm sure I shall not wish for the acquaintance of his wife. I shall always have a great regard for Miss Martins, especially Elizabeth, and should be very sorry to give them up, for they are quite as well educated as me. But if he marries a very ignorant, vulgar woman, certainly I had better not visit her if I can help it. Emma watched her through the fluctuations of this speech, and saw no alarming symptoms of love. The young man had been the first admirer, and she trusted there was no other hold, and that there would be no serious difficulty on Harriet's side to oppose any friendly arrangement of her own. They met Mr. Martin the very next day, as they were walking on the Donwell Road. He was on foot, and after looking very respectfully at her, looked with most unfeigned satisfaction at her companion. Emma was not sorry to have such an opportunity to survey, and walking a few yards forward, while they talked together, soon made her quick eye sufficiently acquainted with Mr. Robert Martin. His appearance was very neat, and he looked like a sensible young man, but his person had no other advantage, and when he came to be contrasted with gentlemen, she thought he must lose all the ground he had gained in Harriet's inclination. Harriet was not insensible of manner. She had voluntarily noticed her father's gentleness with admiration as well as wonder. Mr. Martin looked as if he did not know what manner was. They remained but a few minutes together, as Miss Woodhouse must not be kept waiting, and Harriet then came running to her with a smiling face and in a flutter of spirits, which Miss Woodhouse hoped very soon to compose. "Only think of our happening to meet him! How very odd! It was quite a chance, he said, that he had not gone round by Randall's. He did not think we ever walked this road. He thought we walked towards Randall's most days. He had not been able to get the Romance of the Forest yet. He was so busy the last time he was at Kingston that he quite forgot it, but he goes again tomorrow. So very odd we should happen to meet. Well, Miss Woodhouse, is he like what you expected? What do you think of him? Do you think him so very plain?" "He is very plain, undoubtedly, remarkably plain, but that is nothing compared to his entire want of gentility. I had no right to expect much, and I did not expect much, but I had no idea that he could be so very clownish, so totally without air. I had imagined him, I confess, a degree or two nearer gentility." To be sure," said Harriet in a mortified voice, "he is not so genteel as a real gentleman." "I think, Harriet, since your acquaintance with us, you have been repeatedly in the company of some such a very real gentleman, that you must yourself be struck with the difference in Mr. Martin. At Hartfield, you have had very good specimens of well-educated, well-bred men. I should be surprised if, after seeing them, you could be in company with Mr. Martin again without perceiving him to be a very inferior creature, and rather wondering at yourself for ever having thought of him as at all agreeable before. Do you not begin to feel that now? Were you not struck? I am sure you must have been struck by his awkward look and abrupt manner, and the uncouthness of a voice, which I heard to be wholly unmodulated as I stood here." "Certainly, he is not like Mr. Knightley. He has not such a fine air and way of walking as Mr. Knightley. I see the difference plain enough. But Mr. Knightley is so very fine a man. Mr. Knightley's air is so remarkably good that it is not fair to compare Mr. Martin with him. You might not see 1 in 100 with gentlemen so plainly written as in Mr. Knightley. But he is not the only gentleman you have been lately used to. What say you of Mr. Weston and Mr. Elton? Compare Mr. Martin with either of them. Compare their manner of carrying themselves, of walking, of speaking, of being silent. You must see the difference. Being silent. You must see the difference." "Oh, yes, there is a great difference. But Mr. Weston is almost an old man. Mr. Weston must be between 40 and 50. Which makes his good manners the more valuable. The older a person grows, Harriet, the more important it is that their manners should not be bad. The more glaring and disgusting any loudness or coarseness or awkwardness becomes. What is passable in youth is detestable in later age. Mr. Martin is now awkward and abrupt. What will he be at Mr. Weston's time of life?" "There is no saying, indeed," replied Harriet, rather solemnly. "But there may be pretty good guessing. He will be a completely gross, vulgar farmer, totally inattentive to appearances, and thinking of nothing but profit and loss."
Wow.
Will he indeed? That would be very bad. How much his business engrosses him already is very plain from the circumstance of his forgetting to inquire for the book you recommended. He was a great deal too full of the market to think of anything else. Yes, so gauche of him to be concerned with his business.
I know,
Someone who
right?
has to work for a living.
I know, right?
Unlike a gentleman who has nothing to think of but buying books that young ladies recommend to him.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel like they made her slightly less intolerable in the film. Or maybe I was just distracted by Johnny Flynn. I don't know.
It might be worthwhile to note that when Jane Austen wrote this, she said that she had created a character, a protagonist that possibly no one but herself could like.
Oh, wow. Okay. I would hope that she would have at least slightly acknowledged how unlikable she was making Emma.
Yeah.
Just to make her unlikable so she can make her likable later, like Mr. Darcy.
Or in the words of my grandmother, she needs a good spanking.
Well, Emma Woodhouse could definitely use a good spanking. An intellectual spanking, of course, I refer to, not a physical one. She's a grown woman.
Yeah.
All right. Also, hitting children is bad. But she could use an intellectual spanking of the sort that Mr. Knightley attempts to give her on a regular basis.
Yes.
All right.
Which probably does more good anyway.
Where was I? He was a great deal too full of the market to think of anything else, which is just as it should be for a thriving man. What has he to do with books? And I have no doubt that he will thrive and be a very rich man in time, and his being illiterate in course need not disturb us. I wonder he did not remember the book, was all Harriet's answer, and spoke with a degree of grave displeasure, which Emma thought might be safely left to itself. She, therefore, said no more for the time. Her next beginning was, in one respect, perhaps, Mr. Elton's manners are superior to Mr. Knightley's or Mr. Weston's. They have more gentleness. They might be more selfly held up as a pattern. There is an openness, a quickness, almost a bluntness in Mr. Weston, which everyone likes in him, because there is so much good humor with it. But that would not do to be copied. Neither would Mr. Knightley's downright, decided, commanding sort of manner, though it suits him very well. His figure and look and situation in life seem to allow it, but if any young man were to set about copying him, he would not be sufferable. On the contrary, I think a young man might be very safely recommended to take Mr. Elton as a model. Mr. Elton is good-humored, cheerful, obliging, and gentle. He seems to me to be grown particularly gentle of late. I do not know whether he has any design of ingratiating himself with either of us, Harriet, by additional softness, but it strikes me that his manners are softer than they used to be. If he means anything, it must be to please you. Did I not tell you what he said of you the other day? She then repeated some warm, personal phrase which she had drawn from Mr. Elton, and now did full justice to, and Harriet blushed and smiled, and said she always thought Mr. Elton very agreeable. I'm surprised that she doesn't say the actual compliment in the book. She says some compliment.
Because I didn't say the the actual.
I could have sworn they used the exact same compliment in the new movie as the Gwyneth Paltrow one, that she's loveliness itself. I might be misremembering, but when she said it, I felt like, yes, that's what he says. But anyway, they might have as just sort of a shout out, a bit of a call back to the other film. Mr. Elton was the very person fixed on by Emma for driving the young farmer out of Harriet's head. She thought it would be an excellent match, and only too palpably desirable, natural, and probable for her to have much merit in planning it. She feared it was what everybody else must think and predict. It was not likely, however, that anybody should have equaled her in the date of the plan, as it had entered her brain during the very first evening of Harriet's coming to Hartfield. The longer she considered it, the greater was her sense of its expediency. Mr. Elton's situation was most suitable, quite the gentleman himself, and without low connections, at the same time not of any family that could fairly object to the doubtful birth of Harriet. He had a comfortable home for her, and Emma imagined a very sufficient income, for though the vicarage of Highbury was not large, he was known to have some independent property, and she thought very highly of him as a good-natured, well-meaning, respectable young man, without any deficiency of useful understanding or knowledge of the world. She had already satisfied herself that he thought Harriet a beautiful girl, which she trusted, with such frequent meetings at Hartfield, was foundation enough on his side. And on Harriet's there could be a little doubt of the idea of being preferred by him would have all the usual weight and efficacy. I mean, we've all been there, right? Yeah. Somebody likes us and we're like, oh, now that I think of it, they are quite attractive, but it's not a good thing.
She's not wrong, but yeah, it's not a good thing.
It's not something that one should encourage.
Yeah.
And he was really a very pleasing young man, a young man whom any woman not fastidious might like. Oh, that's a backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
He was reckoned very handsome, his person much admired in general, though not by her, there being a want of elegance of feature which she could not dispense with, But the girl who could be gratified with Robert Martin's riding about the country to get walnuts for her might very well be conquered by Mr. Elton's admiration. I mean, at least there's a sort of logic to her thought process there.
Yeah.
Oh, she was taken in by this coarse young farmer riding about the countryside to get her walnuts? Well, she's easily impressed. It's not good logic, but it is a sort of logic.
Yeah.
There's a method to Emma's madness. Okay. I want everyone to appreciate that I'm about to read a whole nother chapter, despite the fact that there is an amazing smelling shepherd's pie sitting on my stove right now, just right back there. And it smells so good. I want to eat it. It's probably cool enough to eat by now. All right, chapter 5. We're doing it.
We're doing it.
I do not know what your wait. Who am I reading right now? Mr. Knightley. Got it. I do not know what your opinion may be, Mrs. Weston, said Mr. Knightley, of this great intimacy between Emma and Harriet Smith, but I think it is a bad thing. A bad thing? Do you really think it a bad thing? Why so? I think they will neither of them do the other any good. You surprise me. Emma must do Harriet good, and by supplying her with a new object of interest, Harriet may be said to do Emma good. I have been seeing their intimacy with the greatest pleasure. How very differently we feel. Not think they will do each other any good. This will certainly be the beginning of one of our quarrels about Emma, Mr. Knightley.
One of. I say one of, but there are
several. For there are several. I imagine there have been several.
Yes.
Perhaps you think I am come on purpose to quarrel with you, knowing Weston to be out, and that you must still fight your own battle. Mr. Weston would undoubtedly support me if he were here, for he thinks exactly as I do on the subject. We were speaking of it only yesterday, and agreeing how fortunate it was that there should be such a girl in Highbury for her to associate with. Mr. Knightley, I shall not allow you to be a fair judge in this case. You are so much used to live alone that you do not know the value of a good companion, and perhaps no man can be a good judge of the comfort a woman feels in the society of one of her own sex, after being used to it all her life. I can imagine your objection to Harriet Smith. She is not the superior young woman which Emma's friend ought to be, and as Emma wants to see her better informed, it will be an inducement to her to read more herself. They will read together. She means it, I know. Emma has been meaning to read more ever since she was 12 years old. I have seen a great many lists of her drawing up at various times of books that she meant to read regularly through, and very good lists they were, very well chosen, very neatly arranged, sometimes alphabetically and sometimes by some other rule. The list she drew up when only 14, I remember thinking it did her judgment so much credit that I preserved it some time, and I dare say she may have made out a very good list now. But I have done with expecting any course of steady reading. from Emma. She will never submit to anything requiring industry and patience, and a subjection of the fancy to the understanding. Where Miss Taylor failed to stimulate, I may safely affirm that Harriet Smith will do nothing. You never could persuade her to read half so much as you wished. You knew you could not. I dare say, replied Mrs. Weston, smiling, that I thought so then. But since we have parted, I can never remember Emma's omitting to do anything I wished. I officially hate it anytime Mr. Knightley refers to remembering something about Emma when she was younger, because it just makes me do the mental math of how old he was at the time, and remind me that he has basically known her since she was a child.
I mean,
in case anybody missed the first 3 chapters, I was very upset to learn that in the book, Mr. Knightley is, 17 years older than Emma? Nearly twice her age?
Yeah.
Not okay. Not down with it. I'm trying very hard to picture him as Johnny Flynn, who is about that age, but looks much younger. He looks a reasonable, for the time period, age difference from Anya Taylor-Joy.
Yes, who also looks much younger than she is.
Yeah.
She looks like a baby.
Yeah, well, and she's playing younger than she is as well.
Well, yes.
Anyway. I wrote about that part. There is hardly any desiring to refresh such a memory as that, said Mr. Knightley feelingly, and for a moment or two he had done. But I, he soon added, who have had no such charm thrown over my senses, must, haven't you, must still hear and remember. Emma is spoiled by being the cleverest of her family. At 10 years old, she had the misfortune of being able to answer questions which puzzled her sister at 17. She was always quick and assured. Isabella slow and diffident. And ever since she was 12, Emma has been the mistress of the house and of you all. In her mother, she lost the only person able to cope with her. She inherits her mother's talents, and must have been under subjection to her. I should have been sorry, Mr. Knightley, to be dependent on your recommendation, had I quitted Mr. Woodhouse's family and wanted another situation. I do not think you would have spoken a good word for me to anybody. I am sure you always thought me unfit for the office I held. Yes, he said, he smiling. You are better placed here. Very fit for a wife, and not at all for a governess. Rude.
Seriously.
I know he's supposed to be joking with her, but like rude.
Yeah,
But
that's a pretty harsh joke.
yeah, that's a pretty harsh thing to say. I don't think it would have been taken so harsh at the time. But now it's like, you're not fit to raise anyone else. You're only fit to take care of a man.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay. We're letting it go. But you were preparing yourself to be an excellent wife all the time you were at Hartfield. You might not give Emma such a complete education as your powers would seem to promise, but you were receiving a very good education from her on the very material matrimonial point of submitting your own will and doing as you were bid. And if Weston had asked me to recommend him a wife, I should certainly have named Miss Taylor. Thank you. There will be very little merit in making a good wife to such a man as Mr. Weston. I really don't understand their joking. It's very...
I don't either.
It just sounds like they hate each other. But I know they're supposed to be teasing.
Yeah.
I can't remember how they handled this scene in the movie, but it certainly read as gentle. They disagreed on the subject of Emma, but like gentle fondness, mutual fondness both for each other and for Emma.
Yeah.
It just reads like they're kind of sniping at each other here. Why, to own the truth, and I'm afraid you are rather thrown away, and that with every disposition to bear, there will be nothing to be borne. We will not despair, however. Weston may grow cross from the wantonness of comfort, or his son may plague him. I hope not that. It is not likely. No, Mr. Knightley, do not foretell vexation from that quarter. Not I, indeed. I only name possibilities. I do not pretend to Emma's genius for foretelling and guessing. I hope with all my heart the young man may be a Weston in merit and a Churchill in fortune. But Harriet Smith, I have not half done with Harriet Smith. I think her the very worst sort of companion that Emma could possibly have. She knows nothing herself, and looks upon Emma as knowing everything. She is a flatterer in all her ways, and so much the worse, because undesigned. Her ignorance is hourly flattery. How can Emma imagine she has anything to learn herself, while Harriet is presenting such a delightful inferiority? And as for Harriet, I will venture to say that she cannot gain by the acquaintance. Hartfield will only put her out of conceit with all the other places she belongs to. She will grow just refined enough to be uncomfortable with those among whom birth and circumstances have placed her home. I am much mistaken if Emma's doctrines give any strength of mind, or tend at all to make a girl adapt herself rationally to the varieties of her situation in life. They only give a little polish. I either depend more upon Emma's good sense than you do, or am anxious for her present comfort, for I cannot lament the acquaintance. How well she looked last night. Oh, you would rather talk of her person than her mind, would you? Very well, I shall not attempt to deny Emma's being pretty. Pretty? Say beautiful, rather. Can you imagine anything nearer perfect beauty than Emma altogether, face and figure? I do not know what I could imagine, but I confess that I have seldom seen a face or figure more pleasing to me than hers. But I am a partial old friend. Such an eye, the true hazel eye, and so brilliant. Such features, open countenance, with a complexion, oh, what a bloom of full health, and such a pretty height and size, such a firm and upright figure. There is health, not merely in her bloom, but in her air, her head, her glance. One hears something of a child being the picture of health. Now Emma always gives me the idea of being the complete picture of grown-up health. She is loveliness itself, Mr. Knightley, is not she? I have not a fault to find with her person, he replied. I think her all you describe. I love to look at her, and will add this praise, that I do not think her personally vain. Considering how very handsome she is, she appears to be very little occupied with it. Her vanity lies another way. Mrs. Weston, I am not to be talked out of my dislike of her intimacy with Harriet Smith, or my dread of its doing them both harm. And I, Mr. Knightley, am equally stout in my confidence of its not doing them any harm. With all dear Emma's little faults, she is an excellent creature. Where shall we see a better daughter, or a kinder sister, or a truer friend? No, no, she has qualities which may be trusted. She will never lead anyone really wrong. She will make no lasting blunder. Where Emma errs once, she is in the right 100 times. Very well. I will not plague you any more. Emma shall be an angel, and I will keep my spleen to myself till Christmas brings Isabella. John loves Emma with a reasonable and therefore not a blind affection, and Isabella always thinks as he does, except where he is not quite frightened enough about the children. That's a good line. I am sure of having their opinions with me. I know that you all love her really too well to be unjust or unkind. But excuse me, Mr. Knightley, if I take the liberty, I consider myself, you know, as having somewhat of a privilege of speech that Emma's mother might have had, the liberty of hinting that I do not think any possible good can arise from Harriet Smith's intimacy being made a matter of much discussion among you. Pray excuse me, but supposing any little inconvenience may be apprehended from the intimacy, it cannot be expected that Emma, accountable to nobody but her father, who perfectly approves the acquaintance, should put an end to it, so long as it is a source of pleasure to herself. It has been so many years my province to give advice, that you cannot be surprised, Mr. Knightley, at this little remains of office. Not at all, cried he. I am much obliged to you for it. It is very good advice, and it shall have a better fate than your advice has been often found, for it shall be attended to. Mrs. John Knightley is easily alarmed, and might be made unhappy about her sister. Be satisfied, said he. I will not raise any outcry. I will keep my ill humor to myself. I have a very sincere interest in Emma. Isabel does not seem more my sister, has never excited a greater interest, perhaps hardly so great. There is an anxiety, a curiosity in what one feels for Emma. I wonder what will become of her. So do I, said Mrs. Weston gently, very much. She always declares she will never marry, which, of course, means just nothing at all. But I have no idea that she has ever yet seen a man she cared for. It would not be a bad thing. Whoa, that was a Freudian slip. It would not be a bad thing for her to be very much in love with a proper object. I should like to see Emma in love, and in some doubt of a return. It would do her good. But there is nobody hereabouts to attach her, and she goes so seldom from home. There does indeed seem as little to tempt her to break her resolution at present, said Mrs. Weston, as can well be. And while she is so happy at Hartfield, I cannot wish her to be forming any attachment which would be creating such difficulties on poor Mr. Woodhouse's account. I do not recommend matrimony at present to Emma, though I mean no slight to the state, I assure you. Part of her meaning was to conceal some favourite thoughts of her own and Mr. Weston's on the subject as much as possible. There were wishes at Randalls respecting Emma's destiny, but it was not desirable to have them suspected, and the quiet transition of Mr. Knightley soon afterwards made to, "What does Weston think of the weather? Shall we have rain?" convinced her that he had nothing more to say or surmise about Hartfield. And on that note, we will wrap up a little earlier than we did yesterday, and we will in the future, because I simply must eat my pie. I simply must. Incidentally, I made this shepherd/cottage pie type scenario with ground turkey because that is what I had, and it needed to be used. And if anybody has a really good idea, because shepherd's pie is usually lamb, cottage pie is with beef, what would such a pie made with turkey be called? I have not come up with a good name for it yet, except for Norfolk pie, because that is a breed of turkey, but I'm not totally sold on it yet. So someone help me come up with a good name for this amazing pie I'm about to shove in my face. And please join us tomorrow. I will try to get actually closer to 6 p.m. tomorrow, and every Monday through Saturday until we are done with Jane Austen's Emma, and Sundays at 7 on the same YouTube channel Instagram, that's youtube.com/thesarahshay, for my all request live stream concerts that I'm doing weekly. That's why that's the only day a week that I will not be reading Emma. So on that note, I shall say goodbye and hopefully see some of you in the future.